So Doug, you mentioned EVs earlier and how families are coming home and just plugging in their EV. And I think that, that's something that we can use to talk about the hours that were chosen for the peak use times. And we have heard some feedback from members that we have chosen the worst hours of the day because that is when members either are getting ready in the morning or when they're coming home and they're trying to, have their nightly routine with their families. And, plugging your EV in is a part of that. So can you just expand a little bit on why those hours were chosen?
It is true, Melissa, that these hours come at a very inconvenient time for our members. It does maximize the inconvenience of using electricity, and we get that and we regret that. But one thing to think about is that out of every $100 that we collect in rates, 43 to 45 of those dollars go right around to purchase or produce the power that our members use. Of that 43 to $45, currently 18% of that is directly related to not how much power our members use, but when they use that power. In the next 3 years, that is going to increase from 18% to 25%. So demand charges are becoming much more financially consequential, not just for KEC, but for every utility in the nation. Now, the issue about it being designed for maximum inconvenience is a real one. I'm coming home at the same time that our members do. We like to wash our clothes or cook a dinner. We're watching television. We're turning on our lights. We're heating our homes all at the same time. 2 4-hour blocks of time is when our members are using the most amount of power, and it is the least convenient time to try to be minimizing your utilization. But therein is the problem, because everyone else in the Northwest is doing that exact same thing at the exact same time. We, in part of building up these rates, we looked at our peak demand over the last 10 years, month by month. And in those 120 months that we looked at, all but four of our peaks occurred within these 2 4-hour periods of time. So what that says is that these are the times when the most amount of power is being used, and that's the peak that the grid has to be able to be designed to carry. So the fact that it is inconvenient to reduce your load is really just pointing to the issue that the grid as a whole is having to account for. And what we're doing is trying to send that price signal to members to give them the ability to reduce their utilization to the extent possible. And to the extent that it's not possible, that's okay too. We'll build the grid that's necessary to provide that, but it costs money, and our members have to be braced for the cost that that incremental load that they're placing on the system is causing. One other thing to bear in mind here is if you have an EV, don't charge your EV when you first come home at night. Don't
Sure.
plug that in at 5 p.m. unless you're willing to pay for that extra demand. Set your charger so that that EV will begin charging at 11 or 12 at evening, and it'll be ready to go the next day. And that's the best possible time to charge that vehicle.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And we've tried to put out, a variety of resources on our website and some helpful videos to explain what members can do to try to reduce that peak use charge. But for those without EVs, it's even as simple as just trying not to stack, the consumption of, the major appliances all at once. If you got to run your dishwasher, program it to run, after the peak use hours have ended. Same thing for washers and dryers and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So another criticism that I've heard is that we, getting back to the comment you made, that it's at the least convenient hours of the day. But a lot of utilities, when they implement a demand charge, they do so for the demand that is incurred by a customer at any hour of the day. So they will charge like $4 per kW of demand, whether it occurred at noon or at 8 p.m. The rates that we've designed were purposefully structured so that they were somewhat avoidable. So by choosing a peak use demand and giving the first 5 kW of demand at no cost gives our members the ability to shift load around a little bit, and to the extent that their life pattern can be altered, they can take steps, to your point, to shift demand around. A traditional utility design doesn't allow for that.
How about with heating? What are some of the things that members can do to help with
Yeah.
heating? So that seems to be a very common thing. We all need to heat our homes up here in the cold Northwest. So
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, Reed. There are some simple things that a member can do for home heating. The first one is consider turning your thermostat to preheat or pre-cool your home leading up to one of these 4-hour windows of time, and then just dialing the temperature of your home back a couple degrees during that period. You can't fully avoid a peak use charge in the dead of winter or the heat of the summer, but you can manage the cost of it a little bit differently. Another thing you can do is put your hot water heater on a timer so that it's not coming on during those 4-hour windows of time. And then another thing that you can think about is our peak use charge measures the amount of energy that you use over one contiguous hour. It begins at the beginning of the hour and at the end of the hour. So if you're cooking dinner and you can maybe postpone dinner by a half an hour if your oven has to be on for an hour, you just cut the contribution of your stove in half simply by turning it on at 6:30 instead of 6 if it's going to be on for that whole hour. Little things like that to just shift power and spread it out over the 4-hour window of time will do wonders.
how about during? So let's say someone. I know if you are doing a great job of managing your energy and you mess up one time, you know, why haven't we taken like the average peak usage or because that is kind of a concern I think many members have.
So think about how that would look on the grid. If we designed for the average peak, how would the grid respond to that when we have a very cold winter? If we're planning for an average, but then we end up experiencing a peak, we're going to end up with brownouts. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why we're having to send the price signal for the peak contribution that a member experiences is the same reason why we're billed for our peak contribution as a utility as opposed to our average.
Right.
It's something that's very hard for us as a utility to navigate around. Our bill is based on it. Same thing is true with a member.